This is how I went from having knee pain to doing this, and this with zero pain. Despite years of training regularly since freshman year of college, even in the recent years that I've been teaching myself how to sprint, up until recently, I've never experienced knee pain, which is why I was a bit frustrated when I recently started feeling a pinching sensation in my knee from a simple bodyweight lunge. Trying to fix it, I think most of us can agree that there's an overwhelming amount of information online, and considering that elite sprinters arguably have some of the strongest knees, I decided to look into what methods I can use from both research papers and sprint training to fix my knee pain, and it worked. Here's how I did it. I came up with a simple game plan: 20 minutes a day, every day. After 7 days, test out the knee pain and continue this process until the pain was gone. I test out different exercises and stretches weekly to find what works and remove what doesn't. On both legs, the exact location of the pain was above the knee, between where the bone and the quad connects. The pain wasn't severe, but enough to limit my workouts. I doubt this is from training or poor technique, because the pain occurred after being in lockdown for months. My initial theory was my hip flexors and quads are both tight, and to compensate, they are pulling on the tendon in order to reach the desired range of motion, which as a result was leading to knee pain. For this reason, in week 1, I did nothing else except deep tissue work using this, with some static stretching. In fact, in this study with 282 subjects, they did find that there was a correlation between patella knee pain and a shortened quad muscle. Although my pain is not the patella, I believe the tight quads and hips are the main issue here. And based on what I've seen, Olympic sprinters spend plenty of time stretching and massaging their muscles in order to prevent this, because proper sprint technique requires a high level of flexibility, especially in the shoulders and hips. From my background as a personal trainer and speaking with physical therapists, I've learned that when one part of your body doesn't do its job, something else has to give, which usually leads to injury. Right away from day 1, I realized how many knots I have in my quad near the knee. It's not that I never do this, I just hadn't done it in a while. By day 3, following the deep tissue work, I'm also implementing static stretching, because the idea here is to both relax and lengthen my quad so that it doesn't pull on my tendon more than it should, like I mentioned earlier. By day 5, the foam roller is no longer painful. I progressed fast, so I decided the next time I will be using a small ace ball, which is similar to a lacrosse ball, except smaller and harder so you can target areas more precisely, followed by 10 minutes of static stretching with around 1 minute per leg. By day 7, I encountered my first obstacle. The initial excitement of the challenge had actually worn off by this point, and instead of thinking, yes, let's do it, I started thinking, oh man, this again? But the hardest part was actually getting started, because once I began one of the sessions, time flew by, and before I knew it, I was thinking, wow, only 14 minutes left. And even though it can be painful, it really feels good at the end, because you release some of those endorphins that you would actually get after a full-blown workout. So surprisingly, I got similar benefits where I'd get into a better mood and have more energy for the rest of the day. By day 7, I took care of most of the knots that were near my knee and moved up to the outer upper quad. In my opinion, traditional quad stretches suck because they don't work and just put pressure on the knee. It's important to know that all my static stretching was done by putting the hips into hyperextension, where I targeted the hips and quad. Alright, so I've completed 1 week of working on my knee pain. Today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to test out my lunges and squats to see if the knee pain has gotten better, worse, or stayed the same. Depending on what the outcome is, I will either keep doing what I'm doing, completely switch what I'm doing, or adjust and add new things into them. Here's what I figured out. As I was doing lunges, my left knee still does have that pain near the tendon. Right leg was completely fine, didn't feel anything. So that's great news. Squats, same thing. Left side, I did feel that pain, that discomfort. Right side, nothing. So I came to a major realization, which is back in 2018, I was having a lot of issues with my left hip, because that year I was doing a lot of longboarding, which puts a lot of strain on the hip every time you lift and break. In one instance, I even went from Hollywood all the way to Venice Beach, which according to Google Maps on bike is over an hour. So you can estimate it took about an hour and a half by longboard. Fast forward a few years later, and I'm convinced that is somehow related to the knee pain that I've been experiencing recently. Here was my plan for week 2. Before I add anything new, I want to spend 1 more week just doubling down on stretching and deep tissue massage, putting more emphasis on the left hip to see what progress you can make. I'm realizing that a great movement are these lunges where the back leg is straight out and we're just holding that position, because 2 things are getting done. 1, the hip is getting stretched, and 2, the front knee is getting strengthened by holding that position. So I plan on implementing this a lot more in my routine, which is especially useful now that I know my hips are chronically tight from overuse. And in order to stretch these muscles, you have to first relax them. Problem is, you can't really get a foam roller or a massage ball in there, so instead, I decided to use the contract and relaxing technique. The way this works is you contract the muscle opposite the one that you actually want to relax. Your body's smart enough to know that when one muscle is contracting, the one on the other side has to relax in order for the desired movement to occur. This is known as reciprocal inhibition, which by week 2, I started implementing into my routine using those concentric lunges that I had mentioned a moment ago. At this point, I was using the ace ball less and less, and I was using the contract relax technique more and more. Okay, by this point, I realized that my lower abs were also tight, which was an area that I was overlooking because all of our muscle groups are connected in some way or another. A great book on this is called Anatomy Trains, which argues that individual muscles are grouped together across the entire body through connective tissue. Speaking of useful resources, I want to give a shout out to the Knees Over Toes guy. I've seen some of his content, and the main thing that stood out to me is that the fundamental exercises that he promotes are all sprint related. Flexibility, for example, is a key principle in sprinting, and so far it's helped me at least in week 1. The question is, has it impacted anything in week 2? So I got some good news. The right knee had no pain. The left knee had no pain, although it did feel tender. To be specific, it felt like if I added weight, more speed, or more time, that the pain was going to come back instantly. Just like when you're performing a stretch and you hit your maximum range of motion, knowing very well that if you go just a bit further, you're going straight to pain city. Remember, up to this point, I haven't done anything to strengthen my knees. I wanted to isolate the deep tissue work and stretching to see if that alone would make a difference, and it did. However, since I had confirmed my theory, I decided for week 3, it was time to speed up the process and add in eccentric lunges in combination with everything else I was already doing for 10 seconds down. Not only was I able to get amazing quad activation, I was able to get a very deep stretch in the hip muscles, similar to my isometric lunges, where I was able to strengthen and stretch at the same time. In this study, they compared concentric and eccentric exercises on a decline board on the effects of patella tendonitis. The eccentric group showed significant improvements, while the concentric group experienced such negative results that they had to stop the training early. These were so effective at exhausting the quad muscle that I actually couldn't even do one full set with one leg at a time, but instead I had to alternate and do one rep, then switch legs in order to prevent my technique from falling apart. Also, I noticed when I did these barefoot, I felt less pressure on the knee and more activation on the quad. On day 18, I faced another obstacle which almost ruined the entire experiment. On this day, I flew from New York to Mexico, and the flight's 4 hours long, but when you take everything into consideration, I was sitting down for at least 6 hours. And this really set me back on the progress I was making because my hip flexors felt like bricks, but rather than getting discouraged about this whole project, I just accepted this as a minor setback. And rather than increase the length of my training, I instead increased the intensity of my sessions. Got this from sprinting because one single movement can train your entire body to full exhaustion in a matter of seconds. I contracted with more power, pushed harder, and stretched further than I had done so previously. In the process, I learned 4 new things. 1, lifting the elbows during the lunge instantly improved my posture, which resulted in a deeper hip and quad stretch. 2, using a bed or couch, I was able to get the ultimate static stretch for my quad without the pain of a hard surface pressing into your feet. 3, podcasting made time fly when I was doing all these exercises. 4, consistency really is a muscle, and it got pretty strong at this point. Remember, I was on a trip, so I'd come back at 1 a.m. exhausted, and I would still get it done. The prefrontal cortex just got to that point where it would easily override my desire to go to sleep. All right, we've hit 3 weeks, so you know what time it is. First things first, I'm gonna do lunges. Same as usual, I'm gonna do about 10 and 10 each side. Last week when I did these, on the right side, there was no pain. Left side, I had a little bit of discomfort. I'm confident that right now, these are gonna feel great because I've already been doing lunges the whole past week. Okay, so good news right now is I don't feel any pain, right side or left side. I even did a few lunges where I went up and down really fast just to see if that would trigger any pain, and nope, nothing. Same with squats, no pain either. I could have stopped the experiment right here, told you guys how smart I am, and then you should subscribe, but
job's not finished.
The ultimate test is going to be doing jumping lunges, weighted lunges, and barbell squats. And just to be sure, I spent 1 more week strengthening my knee. Here's what I did. Eccentric lunges for warm-ups, followed by 3 rounds of eccentric Bulgarian lunges. 10 seconds down, 10 reps per leg for a total of 10 minutes, followed by deep tissue work and static stretching of the quad for another 10 minutes. I no longer had to alternate this week, and I was finally able to do 1 at a time in order to increase the intensity. Although Bulgarian lunges made these sessions challenging once again because I was able to load more weight onto the front leg, get a deeper stretch of the hips, and deeper stretch of the knee. Funny enough, it feels way better doing these on the bed because your foot can sink into the mattress compared to a hard hard surface or your foot digs into the bench. Apart from the fact that my experiment was so far working, I was pretty happy about all the quad activation I was getting from these exercises, because despite building up to a 3-plate squat early in my lifting journey, I've always had trouble growing my quads, which is another weak point that I plan on tackling with sprint training in the future with a new experiment and a new video, so subscribe if you'd like to see that. Once again, it's time to test out the knee pain. However, this time, if my knees aren't ready, I could seriously injure myself, as this will be the hardest test I've done thus far in the entire experiment, starting with jumping lunges and squats. Fortunately for my knees and lack of traveler's health insurance, both of these felt amazing and I had zero issues.
They're nice.
All right, there's one piece of the puzzle left, and it's gonna be to test out lunges with weights and squats with weights to see if that creates any knee pain at all. I started with barbell squats, which I was a bit nervous for because I hadn't done them for the entire 4 weeks of the experiment, and this was my first time loading weight on the knee. Well, these felt great, and I actually worked up to 2 plates and did multiple reps with no pain at all. I was feeling great until I went and I did weighted lunges, where I faced my third obstacle of the experiment. I wanted to really put my knees to the test, so I did 3 sets of weighted lunges back to back with no rest in between, which, as it turns out, was not a great idea because I felt that some of the knee pain wanted to come back. I was ready to scrap the entire video altogether, but then I thought, wait, let me try one more. I rested for 5 minutes, did some quad stretching, and I took my shoes off. Essentially, I applied a few of the principles that helped me fix my knee pain up to this point. Keep in mind, this is 24 hours after flying back from Mexico to New York, but at the end of the day, in the real world, there's a lot of sitting, and this is a real world test. When I went back to do another set, the pain had disappeared. Overall, I feel like this experiment was a success. The pain is 99% gone, and the real test is gonna be over the next few weeks as I work on the next experiment, losing fat with only sprinting. Every situation is different, so what worked for me may not necessarily work for you, although ideally you learn 1 or 2 new things from this. If you did, hit the like button for me. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.